I was standing on my dock watching the sunrise over Lake Montgomery when I spotted 3 teenagers casting their fishing lines into my water, and that is when everything started to go sideways. This was not some public fishing hole. This was my private lake, on my private property, purchased with my own money 5 years ago when I moved to rural Georgia to escape the chaos of Atlanta. "Hey!" I shouted, walking down the wooden planks toward them. "This is private property. You cannot fish here." The tallest kid, maybe 17, looked at me with confusion rather than guilt. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated card. "We have permits, sir. Paid $50 each for them." I felt my blood pressure rising as I took the card from his hand. It was professionally printed, complete with the Meadowbrook HOA logo, a registration number, and an official-looking signature. The permit granted access to Lake Montgomery Community Fishing Area for the entire summer season. "Where did you get this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "The HOA office over on Williamson Road. The lady there, Mrs. Patterson, she said it was totally legal. They have been selling them for 2 months now." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Brenda Patterson. Of course it was Brenda Patterson. The self-appointed queen of Meadowbrook HOA had been a thorn in my side since the day I moved here. But this was a new level of insanity. "Look, kids, I am sorry, but those permits are worthless. This is my private lake. The HOA has no authority to sell access to it. I am going to need you to pack up and leave." They looked disappointed but compliant. The tall one handed me back the permit. "Man, that sucks. Can we get our money back?" "Take it up with Mrs. Patterson," I said, already pulling out my phone. As soon as they left, I dialed my lawyer, Harrison Atwood. "Yes, that is my name. I know it sounds like I should be running a law firm myself, but I'm actually a software developer who made decent money selling a logistics app to a major shipping company. The name is just a coincidence." "Harrison, we have a problem," I said when he answered. "Good morning to you too, Harry. What did the HOA do now?" I explained the situation while walking back toward my house, a modest 2-story cabin I had built overlooking the lake. The property was 80 acres total, with the lake taking up about 12 of them. It was entirely within my property lines, fed by a natural spring and a small creek. There was absolutely no ambiguity about ownership. That is fraud," Harrison said flatly. "They are selling access to property they do not own. How many permits do you think they have sold?" "No idea. The kid said they have been doing it for 2 months. At $50 each, that could be significant money. Listen, do not do anything rash. Let me send them a cease and desist letter first. We will do this by the book." But I was already looking out my window at another group of fishermen setting up on the far shore. "Harrison, there are more people here right now, on my property," he sighed. "Go tell them to leave. Be polite. Document everything. Take photos of the permits if they have them. We are going to need evidence." I spent the next hour walking the perimeter of my lake, politely asking 7 different groups to leave. Most were understanding once I explained the situation. A few got angry, demanding to know why I was going back on the HOA's agreement. One man in his 50s got particularly heated. "I paid good money for this permit. The HOA lady said this was a community amenity." "Sir, I understand your frustration, but I am not part of the HOA. This lake is entirely on my private property. They had no right to sell you anything." "Then you need to take it up with them. I have a legal permit." "That permit is fraudulent. If you do not leave, I will have to call the sheriff." He left, but not before telling me I was the worst kind of property owner and that he would be filing a complaint. By noon, I had cleared everyone out and posted no trespassing signs every 50 feet around the lake. Then, I drove to the HOA office. The Meadowbrook HOA operated out of a small building that used to be a real estate office. Brenda Patterson sat behind the reception desk, her blonde hair styled in that aggressive soccer mom cut that seemed to be regulation for HOA board members. She was probably 50, with the kind of permanent frown lines that come from years of complaining. "Harrison Atwood," she said coldly when I walked in. "I was wondering when you would show up. You have been selling fishing permits to my private lake." "Our community lake," she corrected. "According to the Meadowbrook HOA bylaws, all amenities within the community boundaries are subject to HOA management." I stared at her. Brenda, my property is not part of your HOA. I have never paid HOA fees. I've never signed your bylaws. My lake is completely private. She pulled out a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. When you purchased your property, you agreed to the community covenants. Section 14, subsection C clearly states that water features within the Meadowbrook area are considered shared resources. My property deed says nothing about HOA membership. I specifically bought land outside the HOA boundaries. Your property borders HOA land on 3 sides. That makes you subject to our authority. She said it with such confidence, such absolute certainty, that I almost wondered if I had missed something. That is not how property law works, Brenda. You know that is not how it works. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. I have consulted with our legal team. We are well within our rights. The permits are valid. If you interfere with permitted users, we will sue you for breach of community standards and harassment. I felt my hands forming fists and forced them to relax. You are going to be hearing from my actual lawyer. Every permit you sold is fraud. Every dollar you collected is theft. And if you do not issue refunds immediately, this will get much worse for you. Is that a threat? It is a promise. Stop selling the permits, Brenda. I walked out before I said something I would regret. Harrison's cease and desist letter arrived at the HOA office the next day via certified mail. I know because I was parked across the street when the mail carrier delivered it. Brenda signed for it, read it right there in the doorway, and then tore it in half. That is when I knew this would get ugly. Over the next week, the situation escalated. Despite the legal notice, Brenda continued selling permits. She even increased her marketing efforts, posting flyers around town advertising premium fishing access to Lake Montgomery. The price went up to $75. I called the sheriff's office to report trespassing. Deputy Morris came out, a heavy-set man in his 40s who looked tired before he even got out of his patrol car. Mr. Atwood, I understand your frustration, but this is really a civil matter. If people have these permits, they believe they have legal access. You need to sort this out in court. They are trespassing on my private property. That is criminal. Is your property clearly marked? I just put up signs around the entire lake. And are these people threatening you or damaging your property? Well, no, but then it is civil. Get a restraining order against the HOA if you want, but I cannot arrest people for fishing if they think they have permission. After he left, I sat on my porch and watched 3 different families enjoying my lake. Kids were swimming. Someone had brought a kayak. A couple was having a picnic on my shore. I called Harrison again. We need to move faster. I have filed for an emergency injunction. The hearing is next week. In the meantime, I have been doing some research on Brenda Patterson and the HOA. Harry, I think there might be more going on here than just the permits. What do you mean? The HOA's financial records are public, right? They have to file them with the county. I pulled the last 3 years of reports and there are some interesting discrepancies. Large expenses for community improvements that nobody seems to know about. Payments to contractors that do not seem to exist. I think Brenda might be embezzling. That is great for building a case, but it does not solve my immediate problem. I have strangers on my property every day. I know. Just hold on until the hearing. Do not do anything that could hurt our case. But that night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Brenda's confidence, her absolute certainty that she was right. It bothered me. So I got up at 2 a.m. and started digging through my property records, the survey maps, the original purchase documents. That is when I found it. A note in the survey report about existing infrastructure. I'd glanced at it when I bought the place, but never investigated. The surveyor had noted the presence of underground pipes near the eastern shore of the lake. I had assumed they were old irrigation pipes, maybe from when this land was used for farming decades ago. But now, looking at the notation more carefully, I saw that the surveyor had marked them as active and connected to unknown system. At 6 a.m, I was at the hardware store when it opened. I bought a metal detector, a shovel, and a probe rod. Then I went to the eastern shore and started searching. It took me 3 hours, but I found them. 2 pipes, each about 6 inches in diameter, buried about 2 feet underground. They ran from the lake toward the HOA property line. I followed them as far as I could, using the probe rod to track their path. They crossed onto HOA property and headed toward the main development. I sat back on my heels, my mind racing. What were these pipes doing? I walked back to the lake and looked at the water level. It had been dropping steadily over the past year. I had assumed it was due to the drought Georgia had been experiencing, but now I was not so sure. I called Harrison again. I need you to check something. Can you find out if the HOA has added any water features in the last few years? Ponds, fountains, anything like that? Why? Because I think they are stealing my water. There was a pause. That would explain a lot, actually. The financial records show significant expenses for landscaping and water features 2 years ago. Let me make some calls. By that evening, Harrison had confirmed it. The HOA had installed a large decorative pond with a fountain in the center of the development. They had also added irrigation systems for all the common areas, and according to public utility records, their water usage had not increased. "They are siphoning from your lake," Harrison said. "Those pipes are probably a pump system. This is not just fraud anymore, Harry. This is theft of resources and illegal modification of your property." So what do? We document everything. Photos, measurements, video. Then we present it at the hearing. This changes everything. They are not just selling fraudulent permits, they are actually stealing from you. The hearing was 3 days away. I spent that time documenting everything. I dug up sections of the pipe to photograph. I measured the water level and compared it to levels from previous years. I even hired a private investigator to take aerial photos showing the pipe route. But Brenda was not idle either. 2 days before the hearing, I received a letter from the HOA's lawyer. They were suing me for harassment, interference with community activities, and breach of covenant. They were seeking $50,000 in damages and legal fees. Harrison laughed when I showed him. "This is desperation. They know we have them. This is just an intimidation tactic." The hearing was held at the county courthouse in a small room that smelled like old wood and disappointment. Judge Williams was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who looked like she had heard every property dispute imaginable and was tired of all of them. Brenda showed up with her lawyer, a slick-looking man named Gregory Foster, who wore a suit that probably cost more than my truck. They brought 3 large binders of evidence. Harrison and I had our documentation and a laptop with photos. "Let me understand this correctly," Judge Williams said after the initial presentations. "Mrs. Patterson, your HOA has been selling fishing permits to a lake that is entirely on Mr. Atwood's private property. Is that accurate?" "Your Honor, the lake is within the Meadowbrook community boundaries and therefore subject to our management," Foster said smoothly. "That is not what I asked. Does Mr. Atwood own the property the lake is on?" "Technically, yes, but then how do you have the authority to sell permits to it?" Foster launched into a lengthy explanation about community covenants, implied easements, and historical usage. Judge Williams let him talk for about 5 minutes before holding up her hand. "Mr. Foster, I have reviewed the property deed and the HOA bylaws. Mr. Atwood's property is clearly marked as private and non-HOA. Nothing in the covenant documents gives your organization any authority over his land. The permits you sold are invalid." Brenda stood up. "Your Honor, that lake should be a community resource. He is hoarding it for himself, while the rest of us—" "Mrs. Patterson, please sit down. Whether or not you think the lake should be shared is irrelevant. It is private property." She turned to Harrison. "Mr. Atwood's attorney, you mentioned additional issues?" Harrison stood and opened his laptop. "Yes, Your Honor. We have discovered that the HOA has installed pipes that siphon water from Mr. Atwood's lake to supply their own water features. This has been occurring without his knowledge or consent for at least 2 years." The room went silent. Foster's confident expression cracked. Brenda went pale. "Is this true?" Judge Williams asked. Judge Williams. "Your Honor, the pipes were installed to manage groundwater in the area," Foster said quickly. "It is a drainage system, not—" "I have photos showing the pipes connected to pumps," Harrison interrupted. "I have water utility records showing that the HOA's water usage has not increased despite adding significant water features. And I have engineering estimates showing that Mr. Atwood's lake level has dropped by approximately 3 feet due to this unauthorized extraction. Judge Williams looked at Brenda and Foster like they were something she had stepped in. You installed pipes on someone else's property without permission to steal their water? It is not stealing, Brenda said desperately. It is resource sharing. The community needed, Mrs. Patterson, be quiet before you incriminate yourself further. The judge made some notes. Here is my ruling. The HOA is to cease selling permits immediately. All permits sold are invalid and must be refunded. The HOA is prohibited from accessing Mr. Atwood's property in any way. Furthermore, the unauthorized pipes are to be removed within 30 days, and the HOA will pay damages to Mr. Atwood for the water theft. Your Honor, that is unreasonable, Foster protested. The cost to remove the pipes and replace the water infrastructure should have been considered before you installed illegal pipes on private property. 30 days, Mr. Foster, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Brenda looked like she might faint. Foster was already gathering his papers, probably calculating how fast he could drop this client, but I was not satisfied. Your Honor, may I speak? Go ahead, Mr. Atwood. I want those pipes out now, not in 30 days. I do not trust the HOA to do it properly, and I do not want them on my property for another month. I want to handle it myself. Judge Williams considered this. Mr. Foster, does the HOA have any legitimate objection to Mr. Atwood removing the pipes himself? Foster looked at Brenda, who looked like she wanted to object but could not figure out how. No, Your Honor, as long as he does not damage HOA property in the process. Fine. Mr. Atwood, you may remove the pipes at your own expense. The HOA will reimburse you for costs and damages. I will determine the final amount after reviewing receipts and expert assessments. This hearing is adjourned. I left the courthouse feeling victorious but not finished. The judge had given me permission to remove the pipes, but I had a better idea. That evening, I made some calls. First to a hydrologist I knew from my time in Atlanta, then to an environmental engineer, then to a specialty contractor who dealt with lake management. I want to drain the lake, I told the contractor, completely. I need to see exactly what the HOA has been doing down there. Mr. Atwood, draining a 12-acre lake is not simple or cheap. You're looking at significant costs, and it could damage the ecosystem. I understand, but I need to know what else they have been hiding. Can you do it? He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I can do it. It will take about a week to set up the pumps, and another 2 weeks to drain it completely, depending on the inflow from the spring and creek. You are looking at around $30,000. Do it. The look on Brenda's face when the pump truck showed up was worth every penny. She drove down my private road, ignoring the no trespassing signs, and parked right in front of my house. I walked out to meet her. You are trespassing, Brenda. What are you doing? You cannot drain that lake. It is my lake. I can do whatever I want with it. This is insane. You are destroying a natural resource out of spite. No, I am investigating what you have been doing to my property. The judge gave me permission to remove your pipes. This is how I am choosing to do it. There are fish in there, wildlife. You are committing environmental destruction. I have already contacted the Wildlife Resources Division. They are sending a team to relocate the fish. Everything is legal and permitted, which is more than I can say for your pipes. She looked like she wanted to say more, but one of my contractors walked over. Mr. Atwood, we are ready to start pumping. Where do you want the discharge water? I pointed to a natural drainage area that led away from both my property and the HOA. Run it off toward the county drainage system. I already got the permit from the county. Brenda drove off, tires spinning in the gravel. The pumps ran 24 hours a day. The sound was loud enough that I had to wear earplugs in my bedroom, but I did not care. I watched the water level drop inch by inch, day by day. The wildlife team came on day 3 and spent 2 full days catching and relocating fish, bass, catfish, bream, even some small carp. They transported everything to a state-managed lake 15 miles away. By day 10, the lake was half empty, and I could see things I had never noticed before. Old trees that had been submerged when the lake formed, rock formations. The natural spring looked more impressive than I expected, a genuine upwelling that probably pushed 1,000 gallons per hour. And the pipes, I could see them now, clearly running into the lake with professional fittings and what looked like submersible pumps attached. By day 14, the lake was nearly empty, just muddy pools and the spring creek running through the exposed lake bed. I put on wading boots and walked out into the muck with the hydrologist. "This is more extensive than I thought," Dr. Sarah Mitchell said, examining the pipe system. "They did not just tap into your lake, they installed a whole pumping station here." She pointed to a concrete structure I had not seen before, partially buried in the mud. It was about the size of a garden shed, with what looked like electrical conduits running into it. "Well, what is that?" "That is a pump house, underground, concealed. This was not some amateur operation, Mr. Atwood. This was professionally installed. See the electrical system? That is connected to the grid. Someone pulled permits for this." "But I never saw any permits." "Nobody asked my permission." She took photos. "Then someone committed fraud with the county permitting office. You need to report this." We spent 3 hours documenting everything. The main pump house, 2 secondary pump stations, multiple pipes ranging from 4 inches to 8 inches in diameter, electrical systems, control boxes, even what looked like a filtration system. "Why would they need filtration?" I asked. "If they are using this for drinking water, maybe? Or for the fountain system. Some of those decorative fountains need filtered water to prevent algae buildup." "How much water could they pull with this system?" She did some calculations on her tablet. "Based on the pump capacity and pipe size, probably 5,000 to 10,000 gallons per day. Over 2 years, that is millions of gallons. And this dropped my lake level by 3 feet? Combined with the drought, yes. Without their theft, your lake would have maintained normal levels even in the dry weather." I felt my anger building again. This was not just some petty HOA overreach. This was organized theft. This was infrastructure fraud. This was way beyond Brenda Patterson's usual power trip behavior. "Who installed this?" I asked. "This level of work requires professional contractors, engineering, permits." "The equipment looks like it is from Aquatech Systems. They are based out of Savannah, do commercial and municipal water projects." And I took photos of the equipment labels and serial numbers. Then I called Harrison. "You need to see this," I said, "and I think we need to involve the police." Harrison drove out that evening with Deputy Morris. The deputy's tired expression changed to shocked when I showed him the exposed pump house. "This is way beyond my pay grade," he admitted. "This is infrastructure fraud, possibly organized theft. I need to call in the detectives." Detective Lisa Warren arrived the next morning with a forensics team. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s with the kind of focused intensity that made me glad I was on the right side of this. "Mr. Atwood, walk me through everything." I explained the whole situation, from the fishing permits to the cease and desist, to the hearing, to the drainage. She took notes and photos, asking detailed questions. "The judge mentioned referring this to the DA," she said. "We have been looking into the Meadowbrook HOA for a few months now. We have had complaints about financial irregularities. This might be the break we need." "You have been investigating them?" "Mrs. Patterson specifically. We think she has been embezzling HOA funds for years, but she's been clever about it. This, though," she gestured at the pump house. "This is physical evidence. This required contractors, permits, money transfers. This we can trace." Over the next week, Detective Warren's team tore apart the HOA's financial records. They subpoenaed bank accounts, contractor records, and county permits. They interviewed board members, contractors, and suppliers. The picture that emerged was worse than I expected. Brenda Patterson had been running a scheme for 5 years. She had created fake contractor companies, submitted false bids for community improvements, and then pocketed the money. The water theft from my lake was just the latest evolution. She had bribed a county permitting clerk to file fake permits under my name, making it look like I had approved the installation. The total theft was estimated at over $300,000. But she had not worked alone. 2 other HOA board members were involved. Vice President Susan Hendricks and Treasurer Mark Chen had been helping cover the financial irregularities in exchange for kickbacks. Detective Warren arrested all 3 of them on a Thursday morning. I watched from my porch as the police cars drove toward the HOA office. My phone started ringing immediately. "Harry, turn on the local news," Harrison said. I found the stream on my laptop. A reporter was standing outside the HOA office as Brenda was led out in handcuffs. She was crying, her mascara running, looking nothing like the confident bully who had torn up the cease and desist letter. Brenda Patterson, president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, has been arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and theft, the reporter said. Authorities say Patterson stole over $300,000 from the HOA over a 5-year period, using the money to fund a lavish lifestyle while lying to residents about community improvements. The camera cut to Detective Warren giving a statement. This investigation began with a property dispute, but uncovered a sophisticated fraud scheme. We expect additional charges to be filed as we continue reviewing evidence. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I did not recognize. Mr. Atwood, this is Cheryl Baker. I am on the Meadowbrook HOA board. Well, what is left of it? I just wanted to apologize on behalf of the entire community. We had no idea what Brenda was doing. The fishing permits, the pipes, none of it was approved by the full board. I appreciate that, Ms. Baker. We are going to make this right. The HOA will pay for all damages, removal of the equipment, refilling your lake, everything. We have already contacted our insurance company, and we are refunding every permit that was sold. That is good to hear. I also wanted to ask if you would consider addressing the community at our next meeting. A lot of residents are angry and confused. They paid HOA fees thinking the money was going to legitimate improvements. Finding out it was being stolen is devastating. I thought about it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with the HOA ever again, but these were my neighbors, and most of them had been victims too. I will think about it, I said. The pump house and pipes were removed over the next month. A professional team came in, excavated everything, and restored the lake bed as much as possible. The environmental engineer helped me develop a refilling plan that would not stress the spring or creek. I let the natural water flow, refill the lake slowly, supplemented by some water trucks during the first few weeks. The hydrologist estimated it would take 6 months to reach normal levels. The criminal case moved forward. Brenda Patterson pleaded guilty to multiple fraud and embezzlement charges. The DA recommended 15 years in prison, though her lawyer was pushing for a reduced sentence. Susan Hendricks and Mark Chen took plea deals, agreeing to testify against Brenda in exchange for lighter sentences. The civil side was messier. The HOA's insurance company was fighting some of the claims, arguing that the board members' criminal actions voided coverage. Harrison was handling it, but he warned me it might take years to fully resolve. I did end up speaking at the HOA community meeting. About 60 residents showed up, filling the small office building to capacity. They were angry, hurt, and looking for answers I could not really give them. I know you are upset, I said. I am upset too, but the people responsible are facing justice. The HOA will be reformed, and moving forward, I hope we can all be better neighbors. An older man raised his hand. Will you ever let the community use your lake? I had thought about this question a lot. The lake is private property, and I want to keep it that way. But I am not unreasonable. If someone wants to ask permission to fish occasionally, they can contact me directly. No permits, no fees, just neighbors asking neighbors. That seemed to satisfy most of them. Over the next few months, life slowly returned to normal. My lake refilled. The fish were restocked, this time by me, with species I chose. I reinforced the no trespassing signs, but also put up a small notice with my email address for permission requests. A few neighbors did reach out. I let a couple of families fish occasionally. It was nice, actually, sharing the lake on my terms rather than having it invaded. Brenda Patterson was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Susan Hendricks got 3 years. Mark Chen got 2 years plus restitution. The county permitting clerk who had helped them was fired and charged separately. The Meadowbrook HOA eventually paid me a settlement of $250,000 for damages, legal fees, and the cost of draining and refilling the lake. It was more than I expected and probably less than I deserved, but it felt like closure. Harrison helped me put some of that money toward improved security around my property. Cameras, better fencing, motion sensors. Not because I was paranoid, but because I wanted to make sure nobody ever pulled something like this again. One Saturday morning, about 8 months after all of this started, I was sitting on my dock watching the sunrise. The lake was back to its normal level, maybe even a bit higher. The spring feeding it was strong, and we'd gotten good rain that year. A bass jumped near the shore, chasing something. Birds were singing in the trees. It was peaceful in a way that made the whole nightmare feel worth it. My phone buzzed. A text from Harrison. Brenda appealed her sentence. Judge denied it. It is finally over. I smiled and set the phone down. It really was over. A kayak came into view from around the bend. I tensed for a moment, then relaxed, when I recognized my neighbor, Tom Fletcher. He had emailed me a week ago asking if he could kayak in the mornings before work. I had said yes. He waved as he paddled past. "Beautiful morning." "Sure is," I called back. I sat there for another hour, just enjoying the peace. My lake, my property, my sanctuary. It had been violated, stolen from, nearly destroyed. But I'd fought back, exposed the truth, and won. The HOA had learned a hard lesson about property rights and fraud. Brenda Patterson would spend the next decade in prison thinking about her choices. And I had my lake back, better protected and more appreciated than ever. Sometimes standing up for yourself is exhausting and expensive and takes everything you have. But sometimes it is absolutely worth it. I never did join the HOA, obviously. The new board, led by Cheryl Baker, actually did a decent job. They implemented financial oversight, required multiple approvals for large expenses, and brought in an outside accounting firm. Several residents who had been intimidated by Brenda's regime told me they finally felt heard. As for me, I spent less time worrying about property disputes and more time enjoying what I had built. I expanded my dock, built a small boathouse, and even got myself a nice fishing boat. Not because I loved fishing that much, but because it was my lake, and I could. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I would see cars slow down on the road above my property, people looking at the lake with longing. I knew some of them probably still wished it was public, still thought I was selfish for keeping it private. But property rights exist for a reason. I had worked hard, bought the land legally, and paid for every improvement myself. If Brenda Patterson had just asked, if she had approached me as a neighbor instead of trying to steal what was not hers, maybe we could have worked something out. But she chose fraud and theft instead, and that choice cost her everything. I learned a lot through this experience. I learned that bullies often seem confident right until they are caught. I learned that legal systems, while slow, generally work when you have evidence and persistence. I learned that some battles are worth fighting, even when they seem overwhelming. Most importantly, I learned the value of documentation. Those photos I took, those permits I collected, the survey work I commissioned, all of it became crucial evidence. If I had just complained without proof, nothing would have changed. The lake is higher now than it was before I drained it. The hydrologist explained that by removing the unauthorized pumps and pipes, we restored the natural water balance. The spring and creek now feed the lake without artificial drainage. In wet years, excess water spills over into the natural creek bed and flows downstream. In dry years, the spring maintains a baseline level. It is a functioning ecosystem again, not an exploited resource. I still get occasional emails from people asking to use the lake. Most are polite requests from neighbors or local families. I say yes more often than no, as long as people are respectful and follow basic rules. No littering, no loud parties, ask before bringing groups. One email stood out. It was from one of the teenagers who had been fishing that first morning, the tall kid who showed me the fake permit. "Mr. Atwood, I just wanted to say thank you for handling that situation with us respectfully. A lot of adults would have just yelled and threatened us. You explained the problem and treated us like people. I graduated high school this year, and I am studying environmental law now, partly because of what happened with your lake. I want to help prevent this kind of fraud and protect property rights. Anyway, thanks for being decent. Hope your lake is doing well." I printed that email and put it on my refrigerator. Sometimes the impact we have on people is not what we expect. The criminal trials generated a lot of local media coverage. Several news outlets interviewed me, and I became briefly famous as the guy who drained his lake to catch the HOA. I hated the attention, but understood it served a purpose. Other HOAs in Georgia and beyond took notice. Property owners became more vigilant about board oversight. I heard through Harrison that several other HOAs in the state launched internal audits after seeing what happened with Meadowbrook. 2 actually discovered similar embezzlement schemes, though nothing as elaborate as Brenda's water theft operation. The case became something of a cautionary tale in property law circles. Harrison told me it was being taught in a law school class about HOA disputes and fraud. My drained lake photos were apparently in a PowerPoint presentation somewhere. About a year after the arrest, I got a letter from Brenda Patterson. It came from the Georgia Women's Correctional Facility, and my first instinct was to throw it away unread. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was not an apology, exactly. It was more of an explanation, or maybe a justification. She wrote about the pressure of managing the HOA, the constant complaints from residents, the impossible demands. She wrote about how the embezzlement started small, just borrowing a little here and there, and how it spiraled out of control. The part about my lake was the most revealing. I convinced myself that you were selfish for keeping that lake private when the community needed it. I told myself that taking some water was not really stealing, just resource redistribution. By the time I realized how far I had gone, I was in too deep to stop. I was afraid of getting caught, so I doubled down. I sold the permits to create a paper trail that would justify the water theft if anyone noticed. I thought if enough people were using the lake, you would just give up and accept it. She ended with a line that stuck with me. I was wrong about everything. I am sorry. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. It did not change anything, but it provided some closure. Brenda Patterson was not a monster. She was a person who made bad choices, rationalized them, and paid the price. I did not write back. Life moved on. My software consulting business grew, and I started taking on interesting projects again, instead of spending all my time fighting the HOA. I met a woman named Willow Chen at a local farmer's market. We started dating, and she loved the lake as much as I did. She was a nature photographer, and my property gave her endless subjects to shoot. Yes, her last name was Chen, but she was not related to Mark Chen from the HOA. We checked. Georgia has a lot of Chens. Willow moved in about 18 months after the whole HOA disaster ended. We got engaged by the lake on a morning that looked a lot like that first morning when I caught the teenagers fishing. Sunrise, calm water, birds singing. But this time, there was no drama. Just peace and possibility. We talked about building a bigger house, maybe starting a family. The property had space for it. The lake would be an amazing place for kids to grow up, learning about nature and conservation, and standing up for what is right. The Meadowbrook HOA continued functioning with its reformed board. Cheryl Baker did a solid job as president, and the community slowly recovered from the scandal. Property values actually went up once the fraud was exposed and corrected. People wanted to live somewhere that had rooted out corruption. I never joined the HOA, and they never asked me to. We had a mutual understanding now. They managed their properties, I managed mine, and everyone stayed in their lane. Sometimes I run into former residents who had bought fishing permits from Brenda. Most are embarrassed and apologetic. One guy actually brought me a 6-pack of good beer and apologized for believing the HOA over me. We ended up becoming friends, and he is one of the neighbors I let fish regularly. The environmental recovery of the lake was remarkable. By removing the artificial drainage, the ecosystem bounced back faster than expected. Dr. Mitchell, the hydrologist, came back several times to study it. She said it was a perfect example of how ecosystems can restore themselves when you remove harmful human interference. The fish population exploded. I had to actually thin them out occasionally to prevent overcrowding. The bass grew huge, feeding on abundant bait fish. Bird populations increased. I even spotted a bald eagle one morning, fishing from a dead tree on the far shore. Willow photographed the eagle, and the image won a regional wildlife photography award. She donated the prize money to a local conservation organization that protected wetlands and lakes. We started hosting occasional educational events at the lake. School groups studying ecosystems, environmental organizations learning about water rights, even a legal ethics class that wanted to hear about the HOA case. Always small groups, always by appointment, always respectful of the property. It felt good turning this place into something positive, something that contributed to the community without surrendering my property rights. The financial settlement from the HOA let me invest in the property properly. I hired engineers to study the spring and creek, making sure the natural hydrology was healthy. I worked with the Forestry Service to manage the surrounding woods sustainably. I even created a small wetland area near the creek that became a haven for frogs, turtles, and wading birds. One afternoon, about 2 years after everything started, I was working on the dock when a sheriff's vehicle pulled up. I tensed, old instincts kicking in, but relaxed when I saw it was Deputy Morris. He walked down to the dock with his hands up. "I come in peace. Just wanted to check out the lake now that it's recovered. I felt bad about not helping more when you first reported the trespassing." "You were right that it was civil at that point," I admitted. "I was frustrated, but you were following procedure." He looked out over the water. "This is beautiful, man. I heard about everything that happened after. The pump house, the fraud, all of it. I should have pushed harder to investigate. If you had, maybe Brenda would have covered her tracks better. The way it played out, we got everything exposed." "That is a generous way to look at it." He paused. "Listen, I wanted to tell you that case changed how our department handles HOA complaints now. We take them more seriously, look for underlying issues. You helped make that happen." We talked for a while about fishing, property rights, and small-town politics. Before he left, I told him he was welcome to fish any time, as long as he called ahead. "I might take you up on that," he said. "My wife has been asking me to find better stress relief than sitting in front of the TV." These small connections, these moments of understanding and community, made everything worthwhile. I had not set out to change HOA policies or teach property law lessons. I just wanted to protect what was mine. But in doing so, I'd apparently helped create some positive ripples. Not that everything was perfect. I still had occasional trespassers, people who either did not see the signs or chose to ignore them. Most left when asked. A few required calls to the sheriff. But it was normal property management stuff, not organized fraud. The story spread beyond Georgia. I did a phone interview with a national HOA reform organization. They wanted to feature my case in their newsletter as an example of HOA overreach and the importance of property rights. I agreed, hoping it might help someone else facing a similar situation. That interview led to other contacts. A few property owners from around the country reached out, asking for advice on their own HOA disputes. I was not a lawyer and could not give legal advice, but I could share my experience and encourage them to document everything. One woman from Florida was dealing with an HOA that claimed ownership of her fence because it was visible from the street. Another man in Texas had an HOA demanding he remove his vegetable garden because it was not aesthetically consistent with neighborhood standards. A couple in Nevada was fighting an HOA that wanted to prevent them from parking their RV on their own property. All different situations, but all sharing that common thread of HOAs overstepping their authority and property owners having to fight back. I realized there was a whole community of people dealing with HOA tyranny. Some won their battles, some lost, many were still fighting. My case had become somewhat famous because of the dramatic elements: the drained lake, the hidden pump house, the embezzlement. But the underlying issue was common. Willow suggested I write about the experience, maybe turn it into a book or a blog. I thought about it, but decided against it. I had said what I needed to say. The legal record spoke for itself. I did not need to become a professional HOA activist. Besides, I had a life to live and a lake to enjoy. 3 years after the initial confrontation with those teenagers, I was exactly where I wanted to be. The lake was pristine, the property was secure, and I was engaged to someone who loved this place as much as I did. Brenda Patterson had 9 years left on her sentence. Susan Hendricks was out on parole, reportedly working at a grocery store and keeping her head down. Mark Chen had moved out of state after serving his time. The Meadowbrook HOA had become a model for reformed governance. They published their financial records quarterly, had term limits for board members, and required regular audits. Several other HOAs in the region adopted similar policies. And my private lake remained private, shared occasionally with neighbors and friends on my terms, protected by law and by the lessons learned from fighting off those who tried to steal it. Sometimes I think about that morning when I first saw those teenagers fishing. If I had just let it go, ignored it, accepted the HOA's claims, where would I be now? Probably without a lake at all. The water theft would have continued, the embezzlement would have grown, and eventually something worse might have happened. Standing up for yourself is not always easy or fun. It cost me time, money, and stress, but it was necessary. And in the end, it was worth every bit of effort. As I sit here now, writing this from my porch overlooking Lake Montgomery, I can honestly say I would do it all again. The lake is more than just water and fish and property lines. It is a symbol of what it means to stand up for what is yours, to fight for what is right, and to never let bullies, even bullies with official titles and printed bylaws, push you around. The sun is setting now, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. Willow is down at the shore taking photos. A great blue heron is fishing near the far bank. The spring is burbling, feeding the lake with clean, clear water that belongs here, that was always meant to be here. This is my lake, my property, my home, and nobody is ever going to take it from me again.